So if they're so swell, how come we're having to pay people to drive them?
Senator Kennedy. So that's always what happens when a witness takes a long time. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to all our witnesses. I'm sorry I was late. I was in another committee. How many of you drive an electric car, own an electric car? Okay. You gentlemen don't?
If you mean electric by a battery electric, no. If you mean plug-in electric, yes.
Okay. Of the three folks who raised their hands, how many do you own gasoline-powered cars at all? No?
No, Senator.
No, all electric. Okay. Let me ask you all this, and please give me brief answers, because there are 5 of you, and there's only one of me. Okay? If electric cars are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
The upfront costs of an electric vehicle are about $10,000 higher today than they are for an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle today, but that cost is declining substantially. Right. And so this is a temporary intervention to help the auto industry strategically compete in global markets and to transition as battery costs fall.
You didn't hear my admonition, okay?
Sorry.
Doc, how about if electric vehicles are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
I think sorry, Senator, I'll step away
sorry,
from.
I can't see the names.
Oh, it's Gross, Ms. Gross here. I'll defer to not comment on policy questions about incentives and so on. Maybe
Tell
pass
me
it
your
off
name.
to
I
Ms.
can't
Hinman.
see your name tag.
Gross? I can switch.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I can swivel it.
I apologize. Would you start over?
I was just going to say I'd like to defer on policy grounds, not to talk about policy incentives and so on, defer over to my colleague here, Ms. Hinman.
You don't believe in electric cars?
Oh, totally support electric vehicles and drive 3 of them myself.
So if they're so swell, how come we're having to pay people to drive them?
So just speaking personally then, not representing my company at this point.
Sure.
Speaking personally.
Who's your company?
EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute.
Oh, okay.
And I have to be careful about policy, stepping into, wading too deeply into policy as an independent leader here. But when we think about, again, I just want to ditto what Dr. Jenkins said. This is an effort to compete
yes,
globally.
ma'am, I know all that, but how, if they're so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
Well, maybe then the quick answer for me is I didn't take advantage of incentives, but I also bought used vehicles on the market. I love it. They're wonderful to drive. And so on.
Okay.
Senator, similar for myself.
What's your name?
Maureen Hinman.
Damn.
My hair's longer in my picture, sorry.
I'm sorry. I don't even know who I'm talking to. Go ahead, Ms. Hinman.
I did want to follow up with my colleague, Ms. Gross. I purchased my first EV, fully
yes,
electric.
ma'am. But if they're so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but we purchased our first vehicle in 2015 because it was easier to charge, cheaper to drive. It drives better, faster, smoother. There's no muck on the bottom of our garage. And frankly, when I had my first child, some of the safety features were just better.
But here's what I'm sorry, you're not answering my question. How many cars do we have in the United States?
280.
This lady right here. In the middle. I'm sorry, if I could see your name, I wouldn't just point to you.
If I could, I'd like to defer to my colleague who has
I'd like
better.
to hear your answer, okay?
How many calls?
How many cars are there?
295 million.
Okay, and what percentage are electric vehicles?
1.6.
Okay, hold up that chart. Here's where all electric vehicles are. California loves them. The West Coast loves them. Everybody else is kind of lukewarm. Okay, I'm trying to understand why. But let me move on to this. Let me ask these two gentlemen. I think the reason is because they're more expensive, and people when they drive a car like it to run, and when it runs out of electricity, it stops, and they can't find a place to charge. So let me ask these two gentlemen. I don't want to be unfair. So it's clear we got a long way to go. We got 283 million cars in America, and we got 3.3 million electric vehicles. We got a long way to go. And at least these three folks think that we need to take taxpayer money and give enough money to American people so they'll walk away from gas cars and drive electric vehicles. How much is that going to cost? I'm going to ask them in a second if I have time. But how much do you think it will cost for us to basically bribe every American to drive an electric car?
Well, Senator, excuse me, Dave Sweeter with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I would just underscore your original question with this. There's really two things at play as it relates to what's happening.
How much money do you think it'll cost to bribe the American people enough to make them drive electric cars, to move those numbers?
Electrification's increasing as it relates to cost. Only a fraction of currently eligible vehicles are eligible for the federal tax credit. So,
how much do you think it'll cost, David?
Senator, I think I quoted earlier that...
I'm calling on you, sir.
Apologies.
How much do you think it'll cost?
It ultimately depends on consumer adoption.
You don't know, do you?
We don't have an exact figure.
You think, well, just keep throwing money at it until we hit the jackpot. How about you, Mr. Davis?
Eventually, if you put enough charging stations there to solve for range anxiety, because the reason I didn't buy one is because I may have to drive 450 miles to East Tennessee at Spur Woman.
The American taxpayer for us to convince the American people, frankly, bribe the American people to get rid of the gas car and drive an electric car. Can any of you give me a figure?
Senator, the Treasury Department reports we spent about $1 billion year to date. So for the first half of this year, so roughly $2 billion this year.
We're behind.
As I noted,
how much do you think it'll cost, Doctor? You're a doctor,
so
right?
$2 billion this year is what the estimate from the Treasury Department.
How much do you think it will cost for us to, let's say, get 75% of these 200?
How much will it cost American consumers to remain?
How much? Do you know how much it'll cost, Doctor?
No one knows the future with certainty, Senator.
Right. You just think we ought to keep throwing money at it until we hit the jackpot.
I think we ought to set a stable policy framework that allows American consumers to become familiar with the environment and American businesses to innovate and to compete within that stable framework. That's what I said earlier in my testimony.
And how much will that cost?
Will cost less than the benefits delivered by the policy.
You don't care how much it costs, do you?
I care if the benefits exceed the costs. I don't care about the costs. These are investments in the public.
You don't care how much it costs, do you?
I care very much how much it costs. As long as the benefits exceed the costs, that's an investment worth making.
Well, so, okay.
How much does it cost to seed the industries of the future to China?
I get to ask the questions, Doc.
Sorry.
You're at Princeton, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. How are Jewish students doing at Princeton? Are they feeling better?
No, that has nothing to do with the hearing today. I'm not going to comment on that.
I didn't think you'd want to talk about that. Do any of you have any idea how much it would cost
Senator,
to get, say, 75% of the American people driving electric cars?
If I could, your question is fair. One answer to it is the cost of inaction of the U.S. not competing is far greater than any incentive on the front end.
Okay, quantify that for me. Oh, man, I'm way over. I'm sorry, Sheldon. Quantify that for me, because here's
Why don't you wrap up with this, because I think everybody's had a chance to try to answer your question, and
here's
you're
my
repeating
problem.
it at this point.
Okay, we all want clean air. We all want bright water. We all want to eat, and we all want to live indoors. Okay? But there are trade-offs in all of this. Despite what the Princeton professor thinks, we don't have unlimited money. This is not Princeton. So we have to decide the cost and the benefits. And nobody seems to be able to quantify the costs. They just say, keep throwing money at it, throwing money at it, throwing money at it. And nobody can really quantify the benefits, except if we don't do it, then we're all going to die. And when I go back to my people and say, your electricity costs have gone up 30%, but it's for a good cause. Why, Kennedy? Because you're going to die if we don't do it. Why, Kennedy? Because a professor at Princeton says so. That doesn't work for most Americans. Can you answer that for me? You see my frustration. I love driving an electric car. I think they're really cool. But the median household income in my state's $55,000. Our Princeton professor probably makes that in a week. Okay? They don't care what they think at Princeton. Can you answer that for me, guys?
I can't answer how much it's going to cost, but I can tell you that just last year alone, China in the EV market subsidized it by $12.4 billion, and that's their annual spend. It's more than, even with in our best year, it's more than 2/3 of the United States spends.
But let me ask you a question. How much will it cost China to become carbon neutral by 2050?
I am very concerned. Well, they won't, but I'm more concerned about the risk to the U.S. economy of losing the auto manufacturing industry.
How much would it cost them? Do you know? See, nobody talks about the cost. I'll tell you how much it'll cost them. It'll cost them $1 trillion a year starting today to be carbon neutral by 2050. You know how much it'll cost Russia? $250 billion a year. 3 times what their defense budget. Now, if you believe that Vladimir Putin is going to spend $250 billion for climate change, then you'll never own your own home. So we go spend all this money, which y'all can't quantify. We just keep spending. They don't spend the money. They're at an advantage, and you know how much world temperatures are lowered? None. 0, zilch, nada. And I can't believe our chairman hadn't cut me off. But I am done.
The distinguished senator from Michigan, who I think knows and cares more about the auto industry than pretty much anybody around here.
Well,
Senator
thank
Stabenow.
you so much, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Graham, who I know cares passionately about manufacturing. We share that in common. And I could talk all day. I won't. I know I don't have all day to talk about this. But let me first start by saying that no one is forcing Americans to buy electric vehicles, but I have one. Nobody forced me to get it. My price didn't go up with the tax credits. Unfortunately, the latest round of tax credits is so complicated and limiting that it's certainly not helping as much as it could help. But I will say the biggest issue is charging stations, and I'm about to test that again. I mentioned to the chairman, I haven't driven my car from here to Michigan in about a year, and I'm going to test it again to see how many more charging stations we have to be able to get me back to Michigan in a couple of days. I do want to emphasize, though, and I've said this before, in 1917 when Congress began heavily subsidizing oil production because of fines down in Texas, we didn't have gas stations on every corner either. And in fact, at the same time, Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were working to develop a battery-operated car, but they had no subsidies. So Congress picked a winner, and they won for 100 years, and now we're trying to expand this out. And I would say also, Senator Graham, I agree with you. We have a lot of issues. And I guess what I would say is I think we know more of what the answers are. We just need to do it. And then we need to find out where we need to know more about this. But chargers, we know we need more charging stations. Electric grid capacity, absolutely. Both of those things are beginning to happen. We're investing in that through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. More usable consumer credit, more American access to rare earth materials. We actually have new mining capacity, lithium capacity being developed in Nevada, which is very exciting because we're way behind. I would also say that our companies are looking at using different kinds of technology that don't take all those rare earth materials. Also recycling, which is becoming a job creator in Michigan for materials. So there's a lot of things. There have more battery production, which we know that we need in the United States. And of course, we need to change the Highway Trust Fund, absolutely. But I support American innovation. I will tell you in Michigan right now, we have a stretch of road being built that actually has the charging technology in the road, Mr. Chairman, so that when you drive, you will automatically have your car charged. So I support American innovation. Are we there? No, but we are certainly getting there. And I would also say this, our biggest competitor, there's no question about it, is China. But right now, our companies are competing against a country. That's what's happening. There is not a level playing field. Specifically, China is coming for us. They want to corner the EV market, and their government has heavily subsidized this effort. And they've also been willing to steal our patents, I should tell you, coming from Michigan. So what do? I mean, I believe, have the smartest, most talented auto workers and automakers in the world. We need to do our part to help them create a level playing field. And that's why I'm so glad that we are doing this hearing, because we're talking about more than 10 million good-paying jobs right now. So, Mr. Jenkins, in your testimony, you mentioned the most important thing Congress can do now for the EV sector is to provide policy certainty and continuity. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I know that our private sector, our automakers say, just give me certainty about what's going on.
Thank you, Senator. By that I mean that the tax credits that were implemented in the IRA have just been finalized in terms of their guidance, and many of the programs authorized and funded by the infrastructure law are authorized to spend down through 2026. So these programs are just getting underway, and industry needs to know that they can count on a stable policy environment to make the hundreds of billions of dollars of investments that they've announced across the United States, and to do that with confidence, to drive innovation and to expand our supply chains. And so I think the most important thing that can be done now is to provide that confidence for the industry with bipartisan support for the maintenance of existing policies. Also note that on the consumer side, consumers are just getting familiar with how these tax credits work. January this year, we started to offer at point of sale rebates. That's a new thing for people. So there's a lot for people to get familiar with. We just set the stage. Let's let our American companies and innovators play on that stage and do what they do best.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Swetcher, would you just briefly comment on the same issue?
Sure, Senator. Obviously, policy certainty is absolutely essential. I mean, you talked about not just the certainty as it relates to potential tax incentives, but in a competitive environment, we need to look beyond just 5 or 10 years. We need to ensure that policies are in place to ensure that the U.S. is competitive, not just tomorrow, but well beyond that. So that certainty is important. And Senator, as you know, oftentimes, the general public forgets about the long lead times in automobile manufacturing and production. Right. The decisions made today in calendar year 24, model year 25, are effectively locked. Manufacturers are already looking out to model years 28. So policies that change today have a material impact, but they don't fully get realized for years to come. So that's why that policy certainty is so important. We need to ensure incentives are here to build resilient supply chains, to support consumers, as well as to attract the investment and the jobs that we're witnessing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.